Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. This week we will do a reading from Article 705 of the National Electrical Code. Greetings and readings from radio station 705. Article 705, Interconnected Power Production Sources, is very important when it comes to installing PV systems, energy storage systems, and electric vehicles that can export power. In our other podcasts, such as when we had Bill Brooks talking about EVs that can export power, and when we had Greg Smith of Sun and Battery talking about energy storage systems, we did talk about Article 705 of the National Electrical Code. Article 705, Interconnected Power Production Sources, includes the way that we connect our inverters to the grid and AC microgrids. Some of the new things about the 2020 NEC version of NEC Article 705 to take note of include the addition of 705.13 Power Control Systems, which gives us more options for interconnecting interactive inverters on the load side of the main service disconnect and avoiding the limitations of things such as the 120% rule, or what we should really call the 120% option because it's just an option. We can now use smart electronics rather than all of the busbar rules that we find in 705.12, load side source connections. And also speaking of 705.12, we have removed supply side source connections from 705.12 and created 705.11 supply side source connections with a few more rules to make these connections safer. In one of my past lives, I was a radio DJ spinning vinyl at KHNS in Haines, Alaska. Hey Haines, shout out to you, man. Here I have a chance to prevent my radio voice from getting too rusty. Yes, that's also known as iron oxide, and to share the information in Article 705. In this reading, I will not go into the explanations of 705 besides what we've already talked about. We will save that for other podcasts and my books. My books include PV in the NEC, which is co-authored with Bill Brooks, PV Engineering and Installation, which is a great book to use to prepare for NABCEP certification exams, Solar Photovoltaic Basics, which is a book to use for preparing for the NABCEP associate exam, and another book, Solar PV Technical Sales. Also, you can get really deep into learning about all of this material in my HeatSpring online classes, which are really good at preparing people for all of the NABCEP PV exams. That's North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners PV exams. You can find out all about this and everything under the sun at solarsean.com. And here we go with a reading from the NEC. Inside of NEC Chapter 7, we find Article 705, Interconnected Power Production Sources. Starts out with Part 1 General and 705.1 Scope. The scope is, this article covers installation of one or more electric power production sources operating in parallel with a primary source or sources of electricity. Informational note. Examples of this type of primary sources include a utility supply or an on-site electric power source or sources. 705.2 Definitions. The definitions in this section shall apply within this article and throughout the code. Microgrid Interconnection Device, MID. A device that enables a microgrid system to separate from and reconnect to, operate in parallel with a primary power source. Informational note. Microgrid controllers typically are used to measure and evaluate the electrical parameters and provide the logic for the signal to initiate and complete transition processes. IEEE Standard 2030.7-2017, IEEE Standard for the Specification of Microgrid Controllers, and IEEE Standard 2030.8-2018, IEEE Standard for the Testing of Microgrid Controllers provide information on microgrid controllers. IEEE Standard 1547-2018, IEEE Standard for Interconnection and Interoperability of Distributed Energy Resources with Associated Electric Power System Interfaces provides information on interconnection requirements. Microgrid system. A premises wiring system that has generation, energy storage, and load or loads or any combination thereof that includes the ability to disconnect from and parallel with the primary source. Informational note: the application of Article 705 to microgrid systems is limited by the exclusions in 90.2b5 related to electric utilities. Additional information may be found in IEEE 1547 and IEEE 2030.7 and IEEE 2030.8. Power source output circuit: the conductors between power production equipment and service or distribution equipment. And now we're on to 705.6, equipment approval. All equipment shall be approved for the intended use. Interactive equipment intended to operate in parallel with electric power production sources, including but not limited to interactive inverters, engine generators, energy storage equipment, and wind turbines, shall be listed for interactive function or be evaluated for interactive function and have a field label applied, or both. 705.8, system installation. Installation of one or more electrical power production sources operating in parallel with a primary source or sources of electricity shall be performed only by qualified persons. Informational note: see Article 100 for the definition of qualified person. 705.10, identification of power sources. A permanent plaque or directory shall be installed at each service equipment location or at an approved readily visible location. The plaque or directory shall denote the location of each power source disconnecting means for the building or structure and be grouped with other plaques or directories for other on-site sources. The plaque or directory shall be marked with the wording, "Caution, multiple sources of power." Any posted diagrams shall be correctly oriented with respect to the diagram's location. The marking shall comply with 110.21b. Exception: installations with multiple co-located power production sources shall be permitted to be identified as a group or groups. The plaque or directory shall not be required to identify each power source individually. 705.11, supply-side source connections. An electric power production source, where connected on the supply side of the service disconnecting means as permitted in 230.82.6, shall comply with 705.11a through E. 705.11a, output rating. The sum of the power source continuous current output ratings on a service, other than those controlled in accordance with 705.13, shall not exceed the ampacity of the service conductors. Informational note: see Article 100 definition for service conductors. 705.11b, conductors. The power source output circuit conductors from the service conductor's point of connection to the first overcurrent protection device shall be sized in accordance with 705.28 and in no case sized smaller than 6 AWG copper or 4 AWG aluminum. These conductors shall be installed in accordance with 230.30 or 230.43. 705.11c, overcurrent protection. The power source output circuit conductors shall be protected from overcurrent in accordance with 705.30. If the fuses are not integral with the disconnecting means shall be located on the service side of the fuses. Where the power source output circuit conductors make their connection to the service outside of a building, they shall be protected by overcurrent devices in a readily accessible location outside of the building or at the first readily accessible location where the power source conductors enter the building. Where the power source output circuit conductors make their connection to the service inside of a building, they shall be protected with one of the following methods. There's two methods. 1. with an overcurrent device located within 3 meters, that's 10 feet, of conductor length in dwelling units and 5 meters, that's 16.5 feet, and other than dwelling units from the point of connection to the service. 2. And other than dwelling units with an overcurrent device located within 20 meters, that's 71 feet, of conductor length from the point of connection to the service, provided that the cable limiters installed in all ungrounded conductors are located within 5 meters, that's 16.5 feet, of conductor length from the point of connection to the service. 705.11d, connections. The connection of power source output circuit conductors to the service conductors shall be made using listed connectors as described in 110.14 and comply with all enclosure fill requirements. Any modifications to existing equipment shall be made in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, or the modification must be evaluated for the application and have a field label applied. For meter socket enclosures or other equipment under the exclusive control of the electric utility, only connections approved by the electric utility shall be permitted. 705.11e, ground fault protection. For connections rated 1,000 amps or more to solidly grounded Y services exceeding 150 volts to ground, but not exceeding 1,000 volts phase to phase, ground fault protection meeting the requirements of 230.95 shall be provided. 705.12, load side source connections. The output of an interconnected electric power source shall be permitted to be connected to the load side of the service disconnecting means of other source or sources at any distribution equipment on the premises. Where distribution equipment or feeders are fed simultaneously by a primary source of electricity and one or more other power source and are capable of supplying multiple branch circuits or feeders, or both, the interconnecting equipment shall comply with 705.12a through E, 705.12a through E. Where a power control system, PCS, is installed in accordance with 705.13, the setting of the PCS controller shall be considered the power source output circuit current in 705.12a through E. 705.12a, dedicated overcurrent and disconnect. Each source interconnection of one or more power sources installed in one system shall be made at a dedicated circuit breaker or fusible disconnecting means. 705.12b, bus or conductor ampere rating. The power source output circuit current multiplied by 125% shall be used in ampacity calculations for 705.12b1 through B3. 705.12b1 feeders. Where the power source output connection is made to a feeder, the feeder shall have an ampacity greater than or equal to 125% of the power source output circuit current. Where the power source output connection is made to a feeder at a location other than the opposite end of the feeder from the primary source overcurrent device, that portion of the feeder on the load side of the power source output connection shall be protected by one of the following, A and B. A, the feeder ampacity shall be not less than the sum of the primary source overcurrent device and 125% of the power source output circuit current. B, an overcurrent device at the load side of the power source connection point shall be rated not greater than the ampacity of the feeder. 705.12b2 taps. Where the power source output connections are made at feeders, all taps shall be sized based on the sum of 125% of all power source or sources, output current or currents, and the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the feeder conductors for sizing tap conductors using the calculations in 240.21b. 705.12b3 busbars. One of the following methods shall be used to determine the ratings of busbars. And there's 6 methods here in 705.12b3 busbars. Starting with number 1, the sum of 125% of the power source or source's output circuit current and the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the busbar shall not exceed the ampacity of the busbar. Informational note: this general rule assumes no limitation in the number of loads or sources applied to busbars or their locations. 705.12b3.2, where 2 sources, one a primary power source and the other another power source, are located at opposite ends of a busbar that contains loads, the sum of 125% of the power source or source's output circuit current and the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the busbar shall not exceed 120% of the ampacity of the busbar. The busbar shall be sized for the loads connected in accordance with Article 220. A permanent warning label shall be applied to the distribution equipment adjacent to the backfed breaker from the power source that displays the following or equivalent wording: Warning! Power source output connection. Do not relocate this overcurrent device. The warning signs or labels shall comply with 110.21b. 705.12b3.3. The sum of the ampere ratings of all overcurrent devices on the panel boards, both load and supply devices, excluding the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the busbar, shall not exceed the ampacity of the busbar. The rating of the overcurrent device protecting the busbar shall not exceed the rating of the busbar. Permanent warning labels shall be applied to distribution equipment displaying the following or equivalent wording: Warning! This equipment fed by multiple sources. Total rating of all overcurrent devices, excluding the main supply overcurrent device, shall not exceed the ampacity of the busbar. The warning signs or labels shall comply with 110.21b. 705.12b3.4. A connection at either end of a center-fed panel board in dwellings shall be permitted where the sum of 125% of the power source or sources output circuit current and the rating of the overcurrent device protecting the busbar does not exceed 120% of the current rating of the busbar. 705.12b3.5. Connections shall be permitted on switchgear, switchboards, and panel boards in configurations other than those permitted in 705.12b3.1 through 705.12b3.4 where designed under engineering supervision that includes available fault current and busbar load calculations. 705.12b3.6. Connections shall be permitted on busbars of panel boards that supply lugs connected to feed-through conductors. The feed-through conductors shall be sized in accordance with 705.12b1. Where an overcurrent device is installed at the supply end of the feed-through conductors, the busbar in the supplying panel board shall be permitted to be sized in accordance with 705.12b3.1 through 705.12b3.3. 705.12c. Marking. Equipment containing overcurrent devices in circuits supplying power to a busbar or conductor supplied from multiple sources shall be marked to indicate the presence of all sources. 705.12d. Suitable for backfeed. Fused disconnects, unless otherwise marked, shall be considered suitable for backfeed. Circuit breakers not marked line and load shall be considered suitable for backfeed. Circuit breakers marked line and load shall be considered suitable for backfeed or reverse current if specifically rated. 705.12e. Fastening. Listed plug-in type circuit breakers backfed from electric power sources that are listed and identified as interactive shall be permitted to omit the additional fastener normally required in 408.36d for such applications. 705.13 Power Control Systems. A power control system, PCS, shall be listed and evaluated to control the output of one or more power production sources, energy storage systems, ESS, and other equipment. The PCS shall limit current and loading on bus bars and conductors supplied by the PCS. For the circuits connected to a PCS, the PCS shall limit the current to the ampacity of the conductors or the ratings of the bus bars to which it is connected in accordance with 705.13a through E. 705.13a Monitoring. The PCS controller shall monitor all currents within the PCS. Any bus bar or conductor on the load side of the service disconnecting means that is not monitored by the PCS shall comply with 705.12. Where the PCS is connected in accordance with 705.11, the PCS shall monitor the service conductors and prevent overload to these conductors. 705.13b Settings. The sum of all PCS-controlled currents plus all monitored currents from other sources of supply shall not exceed the ampacity of any bus bar or conductor supplied by the power production sources. Where the PCS is connected to an overcurrent device protecting any bus bar or conductor not monitored by the PCS, the setting of the PCS controller shall be set within the ratings of that overcurrent device. 705.13c Overcurrent Protection. The PCS shall provide overcurrent protection either by overcurrent devices or by the PCS, including the functionality as an overcurrent device in the product listing. Informational note: some PCS are listed to provide overcurrent protection. 705.13d Single Power Source Rating. The rating of the overcurrent device for any single power source controlled by the PCS shall not exceed the rating of the bus bar or the ampacity of the conductors to which it is connected. 705.13e Access to Settings. The access to settings of the PCS shall be restricted to qualified personnel in accordance with the requirements of 240.6c. 705.14 Output Characteristics. The output of a power production source operating in parallel with an electrical supply system shall be compatible with the voltage, wave shape, and frequency of the system to which it is connected. Synchronous generators operating in parallel with an electrical supply system shall be provided with the necessary equipment to establish and maintain a synchronous condition. Informational note: the term compatible does not necessarily mean matching the primary power source wave shape. 705.16 Interrupting and short circuit current rating. Consideration shall be given to the contribution of fault currents from all interconnected power sources for the interrupting and short circuit current ratings of equipment on interactive systems. 705.20 Disconnecting means, source. That means source disconnecting means. Means shall be provided to disconnect power source output circuit conductors of electric power production equipment from conductors of other systems. The disconnecting means shall comply with one of the following, and we have 8 things here. 705.21 Be one of the following types, and now we have A through D. 705.21a A manually operable switch or circuit breaker. B. A load break rated pull-out switch. C. A power-operated or remote control switch or circuit breaker that is manually operable locally and opens automatically when control power is interrupted. And D. a device listed or approved for the intended application. And now we're back to 705.20 disconnecting means complying with one of the following. 705.22. Simultaneously disconnect all ungrounded conductors of the circuit. 705.23. Located where readily accessible. 705.24. Externally operable without exposed live parts. 705.25. Enclosures with doors or hinged covers with exposed live parts when open that require a tool to open or are lockable where readily accessible to unqualified persons. 705.26. Plainly indicate whether in the open off or closed on position. 705.20 disconnecting means 7. Have ratings sufficient for the maximum circuit current, available fault current, and voltage that is available at the terminals. And now we're at 705.28. Be marked in accordance with the warning on 690.13b where the line and load terminals are capable of being energized in the open position. Informational note. With interconnected power sources, some equipment, including switches and fuses, it is likely to be energized from both directions. See 240.40. Now we're on to 705.25 wiring methods. 705.25a General. All raceway and cable wiring methods included in Chapter 3 of this code and other wiring systems and fittings specifically listed, intended, and identified for use with power production systems and equipment shall be permitted. Where wiring devices with integral enclosures are used, sufficient length of cable shall be provided to facilitate replacement. 705.25b Flexible cords and cables. Flexible cords and cables, where used to connect the moving parts of a power production system or where used for readily removal for maintenance and repair, shall comply with Article 400 and shall be listed and identified as DG cable, distributed generation cable, hard service cord, or portable power cable, shall be suitable for extra hard usage, shall be listed for outdoor use, and shall be water resistant. Cables exposed to sunlight shall be sunlight resistant. Flexible fine stranded cables shall be terminated only with terminals, lugs, or devices or connectors in accordance with 110.14a. 705.25c Multi-conductor cable assemblies. Multi-conductor cable assemblies used in accordance with their listings shall be permitted. Informational note. See UL 3003 Distributed Generation Cables for additional information on DG cable, distributed generation cable. An AC module harness is one example of a multi-conductor cable assembly. 705.28 Circuit sizing and current. 705.28a Calculation of maximum circuit current. Where not elsewhere required or permitted in this code, the maximum current for the circuit shall be the continuous output current rating of the power production equipment. 705.28b Conductor ampacity. Where not elsewhere required or permitted in this code, the circuit conductors shall be sized to carry not less than the largest of the following. There's three here. 705.28b1, the maximum currents in 705.28a multiplied by 125% without adjustment or correction factors. 705.28b2, the maximum currents in 705.28a with adjustment and correction factors. 705.28b3, where connected to feeders, if smaller than the feeder conductors, the ampacity as calculated in 240.21b based on the overcurrent device protecting the feeder. 705.28c Neutral conductors. Neutral conductors shall be permitted to be sized in accordance with 705.28c1 or c2. 705.28c1, single-phase line-to-neutral power sources. Where not elsewhere required or permitted in this code, the ampacity of a neutral conductor to which a single-phase line-to-neutral power source is connected shall not be smaller than the ampacity in 705.28b. 705.28c2, neutral conductor used solely for instrumentation, voltage detection, or phase detection. A power production equipment neutral conductor used solely for instrumentation, voltage detection, or phase detection shall be permitted to be sized in accordance with 250.102. 705.30, overcurrent protection. 705.30a, circuit and equipment. Power source output circuit conductors and equipment shall be provided with overcurrent protection. Circuits connected to more than one electrical source shall have overcurrent devices located to provide overcurrent protection from all sources. 705.30b, overcurrent device ratings. The overcurrent devices in other than generator systems shall be sized to carry not less than 125% of the maximum currents as calculated in 705.28a. The rating or setting of overcurrent devices shall be permitted in accordance with 240.4b and c. Exception: circuits containing an assembly together with its overcurrent device or devices that is listed for continuous operation at 100% of its rating shall be permitted to be utilized at 100% of its rating. 705.30c, power transformers. Transformers with sources on each side shall be provided with overcurrent protection in accordance with 450.3. The primary shall be the side connected to the largest source of available fault current. Secondary protection shall not be required for a transformer secondary that has a current rating not less than the sum of the rated continuous output currents of the power sources connected to the secondary. 705.30d, generators. Generators shall be provided with overcurrent protection in accordance with 445.12. 705.32, ground fault protection. Where protection is installed in accordance with 230.95, the output of an interactive system shall be connected to the supply side of the ground fault protection. Exception to 705.32 ground fault protection. Correction shall be permitted to be made to the load side of ground fault protection if there is ground fault protection for equipment from all ground fault current sources. 705.40 loss of primary source. The output of electric power production equipment shall be automatically disconnected from all ungrounded conductors of the interconnected systems when one or more of the phases to which it is connected opens. The electric power production equipment shall not be reconnected until all phases of the interconnected system to which it is connected are restored. This requirement shall not be applicable to electric power production equipment providing power to an emergency or legally required standby system. Exception: a listed interactive inverter shall trip or shall be permitted to automatically cease exporting power when one or more of the phases of the interconnected system opens and shall not be required to automatically disconnect all ungrounded conductors from the primary source. A listed interactive inverter shall be permitted to automatically or manually resume exporting power to the interconnected system once all phases of the source to which it is connected are restored. 705.40 loss of primary source exception informational note number 1. Risks to personnel and equipment associated with the primary source could occur if an interactive electric power production source can operate as an intentional island. Special detection methods are required to determine that a primary source supply system outage has occurred and whether there should be an automatic disconnection. When the primary source supply system is restored, Special detection methods are typically required to limit exposure of power production sources to out-of-phase reconnection. 705.40 Loss of Primary Power Source Exception Informational Note Number 2. Induction generating equipment connected on systems with significant capacitance can become self-excited upon loss of the primary source and experience severe overvoltage as a result. Interactive power production equipment shall be permitted to operate in island mode to supply loads that have been disconnected from the electric power production and distribution network. 705.45 Unbalanced interconnections. 705.45a Single phase. Single-phase power sources in interactive systems shall be connected to three-phase power systems in order to limit unbalanced voltages at the point of interconnection to not more than 3%. Informational note: for interactive power sources, unbalanced voltages can be minimized by the same methods that are used for single-phase loads on a three-phase power system. See ANSI C 84.1-2016, Electric Power Systems and Equipment, Voltage Ratings 60 Hz. 705.45b, three-phased, and we're talking about unbalanced interconnections. Three-phase power sources in interactive systems shall have all phases automatically de-energized upon loss of or unbalanced voltage in one or more phases unless the interconnected system is designed so that significant unbalanced voltages will not result. That brings us to the end of Part 1 of Article 705 in the 2020 National Electrical Code. In the 2017 and earlier versions of 705, there was a lot more parts. Now we're going to get into Part 2 of 705, which is called Microgrid Systems, and it's very short. 705.50 System Operation. Microgrid systems shall be permitted to disconnect from the primary source of power or other interconnected power production sources and operate as an isolated microgrid system operating in island mode. 705.60 Primary Power Source Connection. Connections to primary power sources that are external to the microgrid system shall comply with the requirements of 705.11, 705.12, and 705.13. Power source conductors connecting to a microgrid system, including conductors supplying distribution equipment, shall be considered as power source output conductors. 705.65 Reconnection to primary power source. Microgrid systems that reconnect to primary power sources shall be provided with the necessary equipment to establish a synchronous transition. 705.70 Microgrid Interconnection Devices, MID. Microgrid interconnection devices shall comply with the following. There's three things here. 705.71 Be required for any connection between a microgrid system and a primary power source. 705.72 Be evaluated for the application and have a field label applied or be listed for the application. 705.73 Have sufficient number of overcurrent devices located to provide overcurrent protection from all sources. 705.70 Microgrid interconnection devices informational note. MID functionality is often incorporated in an interactive or multi-mode inverter, energy storage system, or similar device identified for interactive operation. And that brings us to the very end of Article 705 in the 2020 National Electrical Code. You have been listening to Radio Station 705. And now a word from our sponsor. Thanks for listening to Shawn White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out about Shawn White's books, Shawn White's classes, and a lot more, go to solarshawn.com. That's solar, SEAN.com. Over and out.